Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started with the Family First session, and I'll turn it over to Leslie Abashian to introduce our panel.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Abashian. I'm the Vice President of VALHSO, and I'm also the Director of Human Services for the City of Fairfax. Thank you for joining this Family First panel discussion. Instead of focusing on basic implementation information, which I know y'all have had probably a session or two panel members will share their perspectives on Family First's transformative role for child welfare and local government's role in this transformation. I am privileged to introduce our esteemed panel members, and all these panel members are also very significant leaders in the state, and so we're just really blessed to have them here. And those panel members are Andy Crawford, the Director of Bedford County Department of Social Services and President of the Virginia League of Social Services Executives, Rebecca Morgan, Director of Middlesex Department of Social Services and Legislative Committee Chair of Virginia League of Social Services Executives, Dr. Tamara Timoni, Deputy Director of Hanover Department of Social Services and the CSA Committee Chair of Virginia League of Social Services Executives, and Kristen Zagar, Department of Social Services and Deputy Commissioner of Human Services for the state of Virginia. Before I turn it over to this panel, I just ask that questions, if you have questions or comments, if you'll put them in the chat, we'll have time at the end to do questions. And with that, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Leslie. And I want to say before we start, I really appreciate Leslie and Rebecca Vinroot for working with us on the panel here to pull this together. There's something that we like to say that we're really Team Virginia. It really takes all of us. It takes all of us at the state office, regional offices, local departments, and all of our really strong partners, including CSA, although I would say it's much more than a partner, right? It's really a big piece of all the work we do, as well as the partnerships between the local boards and all of our service providers. So we're really coming to you today with this cross partnership lens on how we really can look at family first. So what we're saying here today is that it's really more than a funding source. And so what we'll do is we'll start with the next slide. Folks are going to turn slides, so you might all have to bear with me on saying next slide. But really what this is technically, Family First is a funding source. It moves money. It moves the use of 4E funds from foster care only to being able to use those up front in order to help prevent children from coming into foster care, technically. More than that, though, what it really does is it really drives a whole different systems improvement that we're looking at and a whole different way we're doing our work. The way we're looking at the Family First funding is it really incentivizes us to use prevention monies up front, which means we can use some federal money and match it with some state funds to be able to provide services to the whole family, which we were never able to do before. At the same time, what it's doing is it's having us focus on how to not have a dependency on the use of foster care, specifically a dependency on congregate care, and how to better get services upfront in the community with the families. And so that's really what this is about, is how are we moving our system? So if we take a look at how we're doing that on the next slide, one of the things that we've done is we all understand the funding source. That's technical, we can handle that. But what we're really doing is we're taking a look at how are we integrating this with our work. And one of the things that we did over the last year is we implemented a revised in-home approach to the work that we're doing in what we used to call ongoing services. And what that does, it has a dependency on partnerships in the community, and it allows us to have a strong practice model on how we're all approaching our in-home cases to be able to ensure that not only are the family's voices upfront and present, but that there's a partnership in how we're identifying and providing services. We're having an increase for evidence-based services that are able to be paid for by the Family First dollars, and I'll go into that on the next slide. We're looking to reduce the number of youth coming into foster care, reduce the number of congregate care placements as we mentioned, and over the last year, there's been a reduction in congregate care placements by over 100, which is significant for children to be able to be in a family-based setting, either in a foster home or with their family or their fictive kin. And we're looking to reduce the number of older youth who are aging out of foster care. So those are really what we're looking at, and what we're looking to do is how does our system come together to really support these goals that are driven by Family First. Our next slide takes a look at our current evidence-based services. And so one of the things is that, like we said, Family First is really about being able to pay for those services. In order to do that, this is really looking at the best of the best, the Cadillac model of services, in that making sure that the services that are in place have outcomes, really help make a difference for the children and families that we work with. And so those are available on the Clearinghouse. I am going to put a link to the Clearinghouse in the chat here in a couple minutes, so you can refer to that. The only way we can receive funding and use these services is if they are on that Clearinghouse. So right now we have 3 services in place as of July 1 that we are using and being able to pay for through Family First. The point of this, though, is that we're really using these services through our in-home services, through our service arm, to be able to provide comprehensive services to families. The next slide shows where these services are available in Virginia, and here's the key. The state, the region, and the local departments, and we're going to hear examples from Rebecca and Andy about some implementation in local departments and in the region. But really what we're looking here is a map of Virginia. I know it's small, and it's the current services, those 3 services that I mentioned, MST, FFT, and PCIT. As you can see, it's really sparse. And so one of the things that we're looking to partner with, is for service providers to be able to work and train folks to be able to provide these services. What we can say at the state and what we can say at the local departments is, we have the money, we have the families who want the services. Now we just need to partner with the folks who can provide the services. And that's something that we're really looking to be able to do, is how do we partner with the service provider community, not only to provide these 3 services, but on the next slide, if you take a look, we are looking over this next year to bring on additional services. And so those are the brief strategic family therapy, family checkup, home builders, and motivational interviewing. These are in the process of being explored as to see how it's best served in Virginia. And these were chosen because these are services that are already being used in some local departments, by some local department staff, as well as by service providers. And so that's something we'll continue to build out and have discussions about. But every year we're looking to bring on 4 to 5 more services. So over the course of the next, I guess 4 years, because we're already in year 1, we're looking to have about 20 services. Again, that will be dependent on what's available in the clearinghouse. But our goal is to make sure that the services that are right for the families and best fit for those families are available. And we're really, really looking for those services to be available all through Virginia. So we're doing a call for action. We're calling up service providers, calling up partners to take a look at that map. I know these slides are going to be shared out, and to take a look at that map and see where our service deserts are and really where we need to be able to have services, so all families in Virginia have equal and equitable access to services. This next slide, we're going to move into the foster care side of things. This is the QRTP. So what we had said is that Family First was decentivizing the use of congregate care. And what that meant is it's just not that easy anymore to place a kid in congregate care. What we're really looking at is, again, the Cadillac model of services. We all believe that children and youth in foster care should get the best treatment out there and available. And this qualified residential treatment provider category shows that folks who work within these requirements meet higher level of standards than other facilities. And so we have right now, and you can see on this map, 51 facilities that have been designated as a QRTP. We have 9 that have pending applications. And so this is really great because there are children and youth who need to be in a residential facility and they need quality treatment. And so we're really happy to see that providers are coming on board. Obviously, you can see there's a lot of white space on here. A lot of service desert here. And so these children and youth, if they have to go to a residential facility, are having to travel way outside their communities, way away from their families to be able to be in one of these facilities. I know Leslie asked me to make sure that I called out the facilities that we have. Of these 51 facilities, a lot of them are under an umbrella organization. For example, like United Methodist Family Services. So we have United Methodist, Virginia Home for Boys and Girls, Child Help, Courage House, Gladys Lee House, Chelsea Home, Elk Hill Farms, Hallmark Youth Care, Hope Tree 2, Grafton Integrated Health Network, Grafton School Incorporated, Intercept Health, Gatewood, and Timber Ridge 3. And so we certainly appreciate those folks who have stepped up to the plate and are really serving the children and youth who have residential congregate care needs in Virginia. Our next slide breaks this down a little bit more. You can see that there are 144 congregate care providers in Virginia. And so you see the 51, well, actually, I've updated. It's 55 in the pending applications. You can see we have 452 children and youth and congregate care placements. 129 of those began after 7/1. What's important about that is that any child or youth who was in a in a congregate care facility before July 1 was able to remain using 4E funds to pay for that as long as there aren't any placement moves. So that's something that was put in place. Of those who went into congregate care following July 1, if those youth were not in a QRTP, 4E would not be able to pay for that. However, if you're in a higher level of care, of what they call a PRTF, which is a treatment facility, Medicaid would pay for that. And we can go into that in terms of what that means for local budgets. And I know Tamara might be able to talk about that a little more as well when we're looking at our 3 funding streams between CSA, 4E, and Medicaid. But we can continue to talk about that. What's really important is that we want to make sure that children and youth remain as close to their communities and their families as possible, because the goals are for children to be able to return to their families and their communities. So this is the last slide I'm going to go over before I turn it over to Rebecca. And then, certainly I know Leslie and Rebecca Vinroot are going to facilitate any questions following. But what we wanted to talk about here is really what could be a recipe for success. How do we really look at what we need here in Virginia to continue to make Family First successful? So we need those evidence-based services, all of the services available in all communities in Virginia, or at least be able to be shared throughout the regions. We need to increase our in-home workforce. So we're opening our high and very high risk cases. The high and high risk families are the ones who would qualify for those evidence-based services through the Family First. And this year, there were 149 in-home positions that were made available to local departments to be able to hire additional staff. And we are asking for additional positions in the General Assembly for the budget next year. And we really hope to see that to continue to increase our workforce on the front end while we're looking to decrease the need for foster care on the back end. We need to increase and strengthen our community partnerships and our regional partnerships. Rebecca will talk about that. We need to align our infrastructure. So we have the right folks in the right places to be able to manage this, and Andy will talk about that in a bit. We need to align family first policies and practices with our CSA practices. So we don't have separate tracks. And so we don't have certain families that are really receiving certain services and other families not receiving other services just based on a funding source. And so we've been working very closely with CSA and the CSA committees on that. We need to increase our focus on our front end supports and services, meaning that we're looking to move prevention upstream. We're looking to prevent the need for foster care rather than looking at how to fix foster care. Also, we want to reduce the dependency on congregate care. I've talked about that many times by increasing our use of kinship placements and really focusing on how we place children in homes, in communities where with their families. Right now in Virginia, we're about 10% of placing children in foster care with kin placements. The national average is 40%. We believe we should be higher than that. We believe that we should be ensuring that our children have an opportunity to be with their families in their communities as long as they're safe and their needs are met. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about the recipe for success and a regional focus.
Great, thank you, Kristen, so much for that introduction. We really wanted to, as we were getting ready for this presentation, we really wanted to focus on how we move forward. I think Air System and Social Services was so focused on July 1st. And we are now wanting to talk about, well, what comes next and how can we build our system out? And as many of the presenters earlier today talked about, it's really at this point all about partnership. And so what local agencies should be doing is reaching out to their community partners, many of whom are joining us today for the conference. So I just want to briefly talk about, and I'm going to try and keep Middlesex Social Services, that's where I work, but I want to not focus on Middlesex so much because I want everyone to think about how you could apply some of the tactics that we took in your own communities. So I come from a very rural part of the state, as many folks on the call are, and we are in a service desert, and we try and work regionally. So not only regionally under our local community services board, but also partnering with neighboring local social services agencies. One thing that we did, and I can't remember a time in the past when we've done this, we had a meeting with not only our local community services board, but also our private providers. And everyone came to the same meeting and everyone got along great. And we had a very nice conversation. And what we are seeing, I think, as a result of COVID and some other factors, our mental health system right now is overwhelmed. And for us to even approach our local community services board with, okay, can you please add these 3 additional services and, you know, maybe 6 more next year, was overwhelming for them, certainly. And so what we did was we tried to leverage our local community services board and what they could bring to the table, and our private provider and what they could bring to the table. We didn't want to duplicate services. We really advocated that each come to the table with something they could offer and something different, so that we weren't duplicating and that there would be plenty of access for the families in our community. We are also seeing right now in our system and across the human services field, recruitment and retention issues. This was something that we talked about quite a bit during our discussion, not only with our community services board, but with our private provider. And so one of the concerns that was expressed during the meeting was, we are going to invest in very expensive training for these programs, and the staff will get trained, we will pay them to get trained, and then they're going to go somewhere else where maybe they're making a little bit more money. So we did some troubleshooting around that area. We also talked about what current programs they had that maybe were similar to FFT, that perhaps they could change their model over to FFT to leverage the funding source through Families First. What our private providers and our local community services board both agreed to do, they went on the federal marketplace and they looked at all of the evidence-based services that had been approved and some of the ones that are pending approval federally. And they sort of picked out the ones that they were interested in. And they did an analysis and presented it to us and let us know, hey, this would really work within our current framework. And this is how we could go about implementing. And we also wanted to see how feasible it was for the families in our community. And so we did some demographic work as well. And this gets back to equity. We looked at our CSA data and tried to pick out, okay, what are the diagnoses of the kids we are serving currently? What is the gender breakdown? What is the racial background? What services could best fit based on age, for instance? And we looked at trying to personalize the services in the future for our communities. They did pick out a couple of services that they want to see. And they also expressed a huge interest, and I know that the State Department of Social Services is working on this, and perhaps getting a grant to get training dollars for their staff. And that was something, of course, they were very much interested in pursuing. They also talked about trying to build up their systems in terms of if their staff is getting trained in these models, perhaps coming up with some sort of contract so that those staff were obligated to stay with the agency for a certain length of time, for instance. And so it led to, some really great discussions beyond just Family First, I will say. We did talk a lot about recruitment and retention and shared our stories. And so the conversation was one that we hadn't ever had with a private provider and the CSB and social services. And I think bottom line, what we've really tried to drive home, this is a community program, Families First. Yes, social services is funding it and may do the majority of referrals, but we want everyone in the community, the schools, our court services units, we want everyone to know about this program and to utilize it. And so in the future, I think bringing DMAS at the state level to the table, and then locally making sure our local community services board and our private providers are really keyed in to what's going on at DMAS, how can they get reimbursed, and maybe have some additional training for DMAS for our local partners so that they understand the reimbursement process and know how to get their billing and all of those other tasks completed so that they are reimbursed for the work that they are doing. And also, we really emphasized, and I think all walked away with a commitment to serve the community. Yes, one is a private provider and they are making a profit. The Community Services Board is overwhelmed, but we all came together and decided, we are really going to take this journey together, figure out how can we do better? How can we do better prevention work? How can we prevent more congregate care placements? And so I think that the model that we implemented could easily be implemented in other regions. And we do have a date after the first of the year to get back together. So this was not a one and done. And we are going to continue working on this and work to bring these services to our region. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Andy, who has implemented a model within his agency that really integrates Family First across different offerings in Bedford County.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. I had a hard time unmuting myself. So in Bedford, we are blessed that we actually have access to the services that are on the list. And so we're fortunate to have that. So while we have those services, then we had to figure out what to do with them. So what we have done is reorganize our CSA office. So in Bedford, CSA is under the DSS department, so it gives me a little bit more control of changes. But my CPMT, they are viewing Family First as a huge change in the system in which how we're going to pull down services, and we're hoping that we'll see a decrease in CSA costs over time, because our belief is that as that clearinghouse grows, it will just have more and more and more services in it that will allow us to use more of the dollars from the federal and state instead of the local money that's associated with CSA.
Hey,
So
Andy, can you turn your camera on where we can see your smiling face?
it won't come on.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I thought y'all were controlling that. I didn't know. Yeah, it won't come on. Sorry. That's weird. So just picture me. So anyway, we are looking at changing. So we've changed the name of the employees in our CSA office to Family Engagement Specialist. So I had one CSA facilitator, and then I had two family partnership meeting facilitators. And what we've done is we've moved our family partnership meeting facilitators to the CSA office. And those two positions are heavily funded through the reimbursement we receive from the state for family partnership meetings. So we have combined those three positions where they're all cross-trained to either conduct a FAT, we're using FAT for our MDT team, they can do a family partnership meeting, and we also have a special service that we stole from Albemarle called Effort, which is emergency family finding that we do prior to a child coming into foster care to try to find family and unknown people that we can place with that are kin to these folks. So by changing that department to family engagement, it's kind of changed the focus on just one thing per employee, but spread the wealth across. So we have more access to getting these cases into MDTs and reviewing for service. We've also taken one of my in-home staff who were specializing, used to be in ongoing child protective services, now we call it in-home. And that particular employee is specialized in the cans. So every time we have a new case that's coming over from CPS over to in-home, this person is focusing on the cans to make sure that we understand that we're using the cans as a true biopsychosocial to show us what is needed by the family. Once he gets good and acclimated in how we're doing that process, he's going to cross-train all the other staff to ensure that they're using the cans at the appropriate times with the appropriate focus to get the cases through to FAT. We've also created a Google Sheet, if anybody wants a copy, that is keeping all of these due dates, because the biggest concern of locals is, of course, the 4E is associated with audits. So what we're trying to do is keep track of when things are due, and we have developed a Google form that actually you put the date of each thing you do in it, and it rolls over and assigns a next date in the Google form, so the employee and the supervisor gets an email to update them on when the next CANS or service plan is due, next FAT meeting, to make sure that we have everything aligned in case for some reason Family First can't pay for it and it has to go back to CSA. So in all, we have just been really working closely to make sure that we're looking for new services, and the staff, we've been trying to encourage them to be excited about new ideas. So that's pretty much, I'm sorry you can't see me, Leslie. I'm going to turn it over now to Tamara.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the chair of the CSA committee, I have the benefit of being able to represent the interests of so many different localities across the state. Knowing that Virginia is a state supervised and locally administered system, no two CSA programs may look alike. So as we think about implementation of a new practice, we all have to look at how does that fit into our existing structures. So thinking about what excited us about Family First. One of the things that excited us was about the ability to expand services to families without the need to utilize CSA funds. Most of our CSA budgets, no one really sits around at the end of the year thinking, what am I going to do with all this extra CSA money? So the ability to be able to serve children and families without needing to utilize CSA dollars was exciting to us. And also the ability to align our existing practices that are family driven and they utilize family engagement. That was something that was exciting to us as well. So as we think about things that are exciting to us, we also have to look at what caused us concern. And when I say concern, I don't mean that we weren't excited about the process, that we weren't looking forward to being able to expand our services to families, but we also have to have a realistic approach. And what are some of the things that were concerning to us as a system? And so one of the main things that were concerning to us is, did families really need to attend another meeting? A lot of our families are already coming to court. They're already meeting with us as social service agencies. They may be going to school for other meetings, and it may be taxing for them to have to attend another meeting. So that was something that caused us concern. Also, there were concerns about the current limitations with some of our FAP processes, meaning that there are long waits in some communities for families to be able to get in and have a meeting. So if we're looking at adding another meeting structure, is this going to be taxing on our system that's already in place? Also, not wanting to overextend some of our current structures. Some of our FAP teams are already, they may be meeting once a month, and there's an inability to expand that because we're all dealing with staffing shortages. And so that's something that was also a concern to us as a community. And FAP partners just being unable to commit to additional meetings. So those are some of the things that were concerning to us as we began to look at Family First implementation and how we were going to align our practices. So where are we now? In preparation for practice change, and I believe one of the other panelists mentioned, we all were excited and looking forward to July 1st, and we thought everything was going to change effective July 1, and that honestly didn't happen, which in a good way, it allows us to be able to take a step back and actually assess our current practices so that whenever we do implement more services, we'll be ready for them. And some of the lack of use of services, as Kristen mentioned, can be attributed to our lack of services or our lack of available providers. And this downtime is really beneficial to us as a CSA community. And I know that as a committee, we continue to talk about what are things that we're doing in our different localities. And we're bringing those suggestions to the table so that we're able to not only talk about them as a group, but we're also able to share that information with the state when we're having our league meetings. We're hoping that the downtime will be helpful so that we can put structures in place. So as we begin to implement more services, we will already be prepared for that. So although July 1, we were expecting a huge increase in volume, that didn't happen. That doesn't mean that there aren't other things that need to take place and things that we need to be doing on the local level. So as human services officials and administrators, what does that mean to you? As we talked about, many FAP teams are currently structured. Their structure is unable to accommodate a significant increase in cases. So that may mean that you may need to add teams, you may need to extend your hours, or think of other strategies that can be used to handle the increase. There's the process of using alternative MDTs that can be approved by the SEC. And that's something that you can use in place of your traditional FAP model. And I know a lot of localities are looking at how they may be able to implement that now. Also, as local stakeholders, you may be asked to increase your staff availability for FAP and MDT. And as you're looking at your CPMT, that's something that needs to be supported on the local level. As I said earlier, all of us are currently dealing with staffing shortages, and we're looking to implement effective practices, but we also have to realize the practical nature of not having the staff to do the work. So we're all looking to be able to restructure and do things a little bit differently, and that has to be supported on a community level. And we all support the goals of Family First. We look forward to continue partnering with the state and talking with our partners about information that we can bring to them as we're looking to bring on more providers and as we're looking to increase our use of services so that we can use Family First dollars and take a just take a realistic approach to being able to better serve children and families. Leslie, I think, am I turning it back over to you?
I guess you are.
Okay.
I really appreciate like all this information and all these things to think about. One thing I would just throw out is that, you know, as we're looking at this, with things like Family First come into, into being, or the implementation, it's really important from the CSA perspective to think about your CPMT's leadership role and, you know, really looking at this as a system of care approach. And I think sometimes one of the things we get caught up in our silos, we forget that each locality, you know, is working on their own system of care, and hopefully it is connecting into what the state's doing. So I think that every time we have additional resources, additional things to think about and build our capacity, it's a great thing, not just for, you know, either the CSA process or the social services process. It's for our children and our families, because in the end, that's where they're in the center of all this. And I was wondering, I mean, I don't know if y'all had a comment about that, and then I'll see if we have any questions. Any words of wisdom or comments?
Well, I was just going to say, Leslie, I think that's a great point, and something that our local community services board has done. They actually 3 years ago got a system of care grant through the federal government. And so they have been working in our region to implement that model across programs. And so we are really starting to leverage that regional power and bring some much needed resources to our community. We are working right now on private day schools, which has nothing to do with this conversation. However, I think your point about transforming our system and utilizing the methods of assistive of care and putting that, layering that on top of what we are doing in our communities is really important. We were already moving that way, and so Families First fits very nicely within what we are doing. And I think that in order to enact real systemic change, it's going to take all of our agencies, and it's going to take the tenets of a system of care model to do that.
And I think what I was going to say, Leslie, is that all the agencies, there needs to be a shared mission and a common agenda, that everybody is rowing in the same direction, because that's the only way that is going to work. And so at the CPMT level, as you're implementing these different strategies, making sure that all of your partner agencies are knowledgeable as to what it is that you're trying to do, and that everybody can come together and establish what the shared mission is. That way they can implement it within their own agencies.
Exactly.
And Leslie, this is Kristen. I would add that the other thing is that you can hear from Tamara, from Rebecca, and from Andy that things have to be done differently. And that's the point here. That's by design, is we're not going to keep doing what we were doing. We're doing something different. And like what Tamara said, that shared vision of how do we get there for that is really important. And we cannot fit what we're doing into the old model. We have to look to our 2B and really, really build that. And we feel very strongly that it can't be only on social services. It really has to be a community effort. And so it's hard to do that, but I think we've been successful so far. And now we're at a place where we can really, really branch out and grow this, as Rebecca said.
Do we have any questions or comments from the the gallery? I just see a lot of dots. I'll be glad when we're not just dots on the screen. Once you guys, I mean, sometimes it's just, I mean, this is really nice that there's probably people on this training today that might not could have done it if they couldn't dial in. But at the same time, just that human being able to sit in the room with somebody is definitely missed. Just looking through here. You know, the one thing I was thinking about in all this too is that, you know, sometimes it takes bravery, you know, or takes like takes energy, you know, to do something different, especially if you've been like in your locality, you've been doing it the same way for a lot of time, and to really kind of figure out, okay, how do I do it differently? And I think that some of these, like with Family First, have given us some opportunities to figure out how to use our existing resources, but do it in a different way. And that's very exciting to me, because I think that we've got a lot of resources in Virginia that I think we can pivot a little bit and, you know, use to do a work in different ways. Okay, let's see, Rebecca. For a partner organization, what are some takeaways or opportunities to support this effort? All right, so that's y'all's question. So for partner organizations, what do you want them to take away from this?
I would say if your local social services contacts you and asks you to have a meeting about Family First, please show up and come with ideas, and come with some energy. And you know, if you have always thought about, oh gosh, I really wish we had this service, or I really wish we offered, you know, this to families, come with those ideas and come with those thoughts, because now is the time. Because again, your local social services agencies, guess what, they can advocate to the Virginia Department of Social Services to, hey guys, could you take a look at maybe adding this service next year, because in my community 10 providers say that they are ready to go with it. And so, and I think sometimes the community looks to social services, especially since, again, the funding sits with us. I think they look to us to bring the energy, but we are asking our partners to bring some energy too, and really come to the table with some shared vision, new ideas, partnership, everything we've talked about earlier in the presentation.
And Leslie, this is Andy, the black box in the corner. That you can't see, but one thing that I would recommend this
But
month.
I still love you, Andy.
I appreciate that. So, but in Bedford, we are having a lunch and learn this month with all of our private providers, and my staff have been invited as well. So the purpose of the lunch and learn is I'm going to give a quick overview of Family First and what it is and how important it is financially to funding, and how the evidence-based practice clearinghouse works, and define in-home, because, you know, this new in-home is like the third in-home that we have in our system. So trying to get folks to understand the difference in the different kinds of in-home. And then the private providers are going to talk about the evidence-based practices that they provide, what they're focused on, and what they're meant to really help with. So we're hoping that that conversation will get the private providers intrigued in evidence-based practice and help the staff who make the referrals more educated in making the right referral for the right family.
All right, so you got a question. What is your advice for staff that is stuck in the old ways? How do you get them? How do you cheerlead them and coach them forward?
You encourage them to retire. No, I'm kidding. Okay, I just got an email about peer support. So you partner them with another staff person in the agency who's really a champion of change. But no, I think Andy's idea actually is a great one, the lunch and learn, where the staff can come. So, you know, feed them and get them excited. Take the intentional time to talk about what's new, instead of just, you know, saying, okay, go to this webinar or go to this meeting. You know, sit down as a team and find your change management champions in the agency and have them talk about why they're excited. And I think everyone knows their staff, and everyone, I think, knows the way in, hopefully, and can motivate them to change. I know that's a bit Pollyanna-ish. It's going to take time. But I think that maybe once they see the outcomes, for those who were around in 2008 when we started with FPMs and transformation, and that was a huge challenge. And so go think back if you were around, and talk to some of your colleagues, and what did you do then that really worked. So, but great question. And I would love to continue that conversation as we move forward with talking about families first and changing our system.
You know,
And
one of the things I'm sorry, go Kristen, you go first.
I was going to say, I would add to that too. I think that, change is really reflective of leadership too, right? And I think for leaders to have that opportunity to have support from one another, you have a lot on your shoulders as leaders, and I'm talking the directors all the way through local boards and leaders and the partners. And so it's really, really important to have that space, like what you're doing here, having that opportunity to learn and support one another. I think the big driving force for me behind this is that, like Rebecca was saying, back in 2008 with transformation, really looking at what the outcomes for the children in Virginia are, and to have a reduction in congregate care is so impressive, but to have 480 or so children displaced in their communities, you saw where they have to drive to have 500 and something kids aging out of foster care with no supports. And we all know those outcomes. We come here every day and do this work in different ways every single day. And so I think that's the key, is how do we keep that focus, and how do we see the value in moving our system upstream, so that hopefully someday we really don't have the need for foster care in Virginia. What would that be like? How incredible would that be? And we can serve families and children in their communities with the funds and the services that they need and they deserve. So that's Pollyanna.
No, but that's
we'll
good.
get there.
I think one of the things that I would suggest too is that sometimes, and I may be just speaking for myself, I may be the only person, but we get kind of in the day-to-day grind, the policies, thinking about the numbers on the screen, and sometimes it's sitting down with your staff and talking about, we all have some of those cases that just keep us up at night, or they ended up, it wasn't a happily ever after situation, and maybe using those where you're putting a kid's name and face with the conversation and saying, what if we had this, or not from a blaming or, oh, we should have done this, said this, but more from a, if we could have changed the trajectory, what would that have looked like for this child, or what was our lessons learned from that situation, that maybe if we had some of these resources that we could have made a difference. Because I think sometimes we have to make it, see the faces and see the individual cases and see the successes, but also sometimes we learn from the ones that, again, keep us up at night.
And I don't know, I was looking at Vin's question in the chat, and Vin, if I understand your question correctly, what we have done is we really have started training the staff that the CANS is not a document you do for funding. That's one of the biggest problems I think we've had in CSA and in child welfare, is people see that CANS as something they have to do to get to the FAPT or get to the funding. And we're missing the boat. That CANS is an assessment. It is a biopsychosocial. It is what we need to do, and we need to do it well in order to fully understand our families and their needs. So we have actually just started taking it really slow, and we've been hitting that very specifically to make sure that people know that is an assessment, and it has to be done with the family, and it may take 2 hours. And we tell families, we have to do a long assessment. I might be at your house for an hour and a half or a little bit longer. Can you tolerate me that long? Make sure that you have time for me to do that. And sometimes we may have to do it in 2 home visits. But that family engagement piece, I firmly believe it starts with the first home visit, but also in how you complete that assessment.
Amen on that one. Are there any other last thoughts and stuff before we kind of transition to our next session? I mean, I just want to thank Tamara, Rebecca, Kristen, and Andy. Thank you for your leadership, not only at your local level, but at the state level. Thank you for staying engaged. I think that, it's important for us to have leaders that connect the local to the state work. And, you guys do that. And I really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you, Leslie, for facilitating this. Another really outstanding panel here. Good information to have and good inspiration for moving the needle on this issue. So I invite everybody to take a little break and come back at 2, where we have perspectives from the General Assembly.
Of course, I think that last thing would be a good training for the CSA conference, the 4 of you guys, just saying.
Thank you. Appreciate it.